This is the VFE Network right around Australia and across the world. It's great to have your company here on our streaming stations powered by Radionomy. It's time to do something a little different on the VFE Network today, talking about podcasting. It's a world that we're no stranger to, but we want to talk to you today about a very, very good podcast series that is coming out of Brisbane. It's called Idle Conversations, and the two wonderful women behind it, Rosalind McMaster and her daughter Stacey. The podcast is about grief and how it has affected them in their personal lives. It's a very conversational style of podcast, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by both Ros and Stacey. Welcome to the VFE Network. It's great to have your company.
Thank you. And thanks for having us.
Let's talk about your backgrounds, first of all. Ros, you've been involved in a lot of different areas with psychology and different teaching and all of that sort of thing. What prompted you to move into this world of being able to move into podcasting and talking about this specific topic?
Well, podcasting seems to be the way to go now. My website initially was focused on writing blogs because I love writing and teaching through the written word. But it just seemed to be that we needed to reach a bigger audience, a different type of audience, because everybody seems to be listening to podcasts now. So I wanted to team up with Stacey, and particularly on this issue because there wasn't a lot out there on death and dying about people's personal experience, a lot of psychology type books and theory on death and dying and the process. But we recently had, since 2014, a lot of experience, personal experience with death and dying. So we wanted to share what that was like for us, particularly Stacey.
And I think between ourselves, just our own personal conversations, we had quite deep conversations, and we thought, why not share it? You know, we didn't always just agree with one another. We debated and we shared our own experiences and kind of bounced off each other. So we thought podcast, felt like the right way to get it out there.
And definitely because we're two different ages, and we have two very different perspectives on life and the way to view life. So our view on death and dying was a little bit different as well.
You get quite personal with this podcast as well. I mean, you really delve into what you both personally went through, because the topic at hand and how you address it is due to the death of a very close family member, your former husband, Ros, and your father, Stacey. And you really go into all the aspects of it, not only just how it affected you personally, but how it affected those around you and how those around you related to you during the grieving process in those early stages. What advice can you give to anyone who may be struggling a little bit with this? I mean, listening to the podcast is a really good start, but what do you think has been the biggest benefit you've gotten, not only from being able to open up in this sort of form, but indeed by processing through this whole time to get to this point and being able to discuss it so openly?
It was such a foreign thing. You really don't know when it's going to end, when the intensity is going to stop. I think for me personally, just allowing myself to feel whatever I had to feel. If that was angry, be angry. Don't try and suppress anything. And it's not even been 18 months, and for some people that can seem like quite a long amount of time, but it is still very real, very present, and I'll still have days where I get really angry or get really upset, and I just allow myself to feel it. And I don't say, it's been 18 months, you should be past this now. I just let it happen. And I think that's really important. I think people try to move out of that and try not to deal with it because it hurts. But it's important to move through it, and that's what gets you to a place where the grief isn't so tense.
There's certainly a lot of personal feeling put into the podcast as well, and indeed in some of the writings, Ros, that you've put up on the website. How much harder is it, given your professional background, how much harder is it to then address it from a personal perspective? You've kind of got yourself between a rock and a hard place, because you know what you're taught in as far as the theories and relating to the psychology, but then when it hits you personally and how you have to address it, how do you manage to work with the two elements?
I think that's kind of helped you a lot.
It's helped me a lot, particularly in helping my kids, because I have three children, and Stacey's actually the oldest. My youngest boy is turning 19 and Loren's turning 22, and their father only just passed away in 2017. So it was certainly able to allow me to help them. And I've always worked on an emotional basis. I used to call myself an emotional healer. So I'm all about allowing the emotions to flow and allow them to be. So I think that was a benefit to me. My own grieving process was really different, actually, and I don't talk a lot on the podcast about this because Andrew and I had separated actually in 2014. And there was still a lot of anger towards him on my part. So I didn't grieve the same way. And my kids kept saying, Mama, you're sad. Mama, you're missing him. And that was really difficult for me because I wasn't grieving him the way they were. And I wasn't grieving him the way a wife might grieve if her husband passed away. Once I dealt with all the anger, and I did that through my blogs. After he passed, I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote about our life together, and just an enormous amount of healing came. And so I still didn't cry and grieve according, the way the 7 steps of grieving might sort of tell you needed to do. But then I missed him, and I was able to sort of honour his memory and do it that way. But when I say I didn't grieve, while I nursed him while he was in the hospital for the 2 weeks, because he actually passed away 5 weeks after he was diagnosed with cancer. So it was very fast, and we were still physically close to each other and emotionally close to each other. So in the hospital, I cried a lot while I was with him. I dressed him at the funeral home, and I spent hours with him at the funeral home when I was dressing him. So I did grieve, but it was in a different way.
It's certainly an interesting perspective with the podcast, and a very raw and honest one from both of you, the way you address it during the episodes. And I've got to say, as someone who lost a parent at a young age, and indeed dealing with that grief, and also having lost a child, it's something that no matter what you read, no matter what is told you mentioned the 7 steps that everyone talks about before, and in all honesty, that just doesn't cut it when you're in the middle of that situation.
No, not at all. And I think when you do go through something like that, the first thing you look for is some sort of answer or quick guide as to what you're supposed to be feeling, because you're all over the place, your mind, your body, everything. It's just a complete mess.
Out of your body. You feel out of your
body.
You
do, yeah. And so I think the quickest thing you do is go to Google. And whoever it is that's passed away, how should I be feeling? Because it's so foreign. And straight away, okay, the first stage is denial. And so you kind of force yourself, right, okay, I should be in denial right now. And by forcing yourself to feel certain things, you suppress all what you're actually feeling. And that makes it worse, takes longer for you to move through it. So I think, those 7 steps and, academic advice or whatever on grief, it's dangerous because it's not real and it's not personal.
Yeah, although I think people need to know that, it's okay to feel anger and it's okay
absolutely.
to be bargaining, but just not that they have to do it in a particular order or for a particular amount of time. But I think it's really important that people do talk about how they're feeling. People you're talking to are very uncomfortable with it. Nobody likes talking about death or hearing about death. So if you're grieving, you really need people who will just allow you to speak about your loved one. Mm-hmm. My daughter Loren, the middle girl, she totally didn't speak about her father's death. Only till just now she started talking about it. So it's a year and a half. And she has felt like she's disconnected from her body for this whole time because she just wouldn't talk about it. She didn't grieve at all. And I saw something written once that just said, grief is love with nowhere to go. And you can understand it from that perspective, all that flailing about in space that you feel like you're doing. It's just that love with nowhere to go. I just love that saying.
I heard you mention that in one of the podcasts, and it is the most apt description I've ever heard. Honestly, for anyone that's listening that is going through grief at the moment, or indeed has been through it and wants to hear another perspective, you really have to listen to this podcast. Rosalind and Stacey have done a fantastic job with this. It's going to continue. The website also has some great reading material, a lot of writings from Rosalind on many different areas in this field. Definitely worth checking it out. The website is idleconversations.com, and we will certainly be talking about it a lot more through the VFE network. We'll be putting links up on our Facebook and Twitter, as well as our website. We'll give you information on how you can listen to the podcast and find out more about these two wonderful ladies. Rosalind, Stacey, thank you so much for joining us on the VFE network. It's been a pleasure having you. We look forward to more great work with Idle Conversations and hearing more from you guys very, very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.